like most people, you build up an archive of recordings. So just to backtrack, it reflects on what Matt said at the beginning. When I began my career, I used the name scanner. Where the name scanner comes from, I was using a radio scanner. Radio scanner looks like an old-fashioned mobile phone you'll see in an 80s movie. Yeah. What it allowed you to do was tune into radio frequencies. So people would use it commonly. They'd sit by an airport. You'd park outside the airport. You'd switch it on. You'd scan the airwaves like a sophisticated radio receiver you'd have at home to listen to the radio. And you would pick up the pilots. So you could sit there and listen to the pilots. And that was a real hobbyist thing at the time. And what I used to do was tune through, and I discovered you could pick up mobile phone calls on it when they worked on an analog network. So yes, I would sit at home and I would sit and listen to other people's private phone calls. Not only that, I would record all of them because, these only happen once. These happened at this moment. I recorded them and then I released them on CD, as you do. Very controversial, very newsworthy. There was a South Bank show made about me, which you can watch online, CNN, BBC, all kinds of feeds. It was ridiculous. I mean, had this been today in the internet age, I don't know how this would have been kind of processed in a way, but this is kind of 1992, yes.
Have you ever had anyone approach you that had heard the CD of their conversation and say, I want my royalties?
Yeah, well, if you hear the first CD basically is men talking to prostitutes, people selling drugs and cheating on their partners. So basically, I did have a guy, it's only happened once, a guy wrote to me and said, I think I'm on your first CD. And I wrote back and said, oh, I'm really sorry about it. Please remind me, are you the guy cheating on your wife? Are you the one ordering the prostitute? Are you selling Nike trainers, which was the term they were used for drugs at the time? And never ever heard back. So what's interesting, what was for me fascinating, so I would perform live. I would be invited to play in different places. I went to New York. I'd stand on a stage, not with a modular, but I had another kind of very small setup had a Yamaha sampler, had a Boss effects unit. I had all this kind of stuff, but in other kind of hardware. And then I would tune through the radio airwaves. So I'd pick up and see what's happening live. A woman I was staying with, an Irish woman, friend of a friend, came up to me afterwards the gig, and she was my, landlord in a sense for the time I was there. And she was really angry. And she said, I'm shocked they would use my phone calls in your performance. And I said, well, were you on the phone during the gig? She said, no. I said, well, it wasn't you. And it was remarkable. It led into that kind of consideration, how we don't recognize each other's voices at times, how we don't know what we necessarily sound like. And then imagine you're then being projected over a PA system at volume, and then I'm processing it and looping it and doing all kinds of things. What I was really interested in particular was making music of the moment. And this was probably the best way to demonstrate it really was in the moment. What you were hearing right now was happening in the real world at this very second, What you were listening to was a picture of New York at this moment, or Plymouth at this exact moment, people on their phones. And it was fascinating to be able to hear how people talk to each other in a way, how people manipulate. We all do it, how you manipulate others through your language, maybe not consciously, but there's a way we all use language, how we use pauses and how we use conversation. So I recorded tons of that. So what you heard was somebody's answer phone. And it's just a recording of somebody's answer phone I picked up, and he's ringing in, listening to the messages. So that's the other thing you'd get. You'd sometimes get people just listening. I'd be listening to other people listening, which was always fascinating. For me, some of the creepiest, when you'd hear somebody listening to phone sex lines. What was popular at the time was somebody ringing up a pre-recorded phone sex line. You'd have a number in the paper, you'd ring it up. So all you were listening to basically was someone listening to a sex talk, and then you could hear their heavy breathing, and there was nothing more creepy than that. I felt dirty, listening to that. But I recorded all of this. Of course I did. That's the kind of thing I did. And then I played a game with my records. So there's one very famous piece called Heidi I released, which is the closest I get to a kind of hit single from this period, where there's a man talking to Heidi, and he says, Heidi, Heidi, Heidi. You have to understand, Heidi, I love you, Heidi. Heidi, no matter how much I tell you, Heidi. And he says Heidi constantly, which is an empowering thing. If somebody keeps using your name, you're probably accustomed to this. It's an empowering thing. It's really uncomfortable. If somebody's talking to you, they say, well, the thing is, Matt, what you've really got to do, Matt, and it's a horrible feeling when somebody keeps repeating your name back to you. It's really quite awkward. So he does it to this girl. But what I did in the conversation was remove the woman. So you only hear him. And then on a later record, you actually hear the woman's side of it. It's just like a story split into two parts. Well, what's great, if you, I studied sociology at school, and there's a great phrase which is repaired indexicality. It's a fantastic phrase to impress your friends with. Repaired indexicality. It's where you repair language and sentences. So if you say to, and it's really difficult, if you're with a friend who's been with their partner for years, or one of your family, your parents or something, there's nothing more annoying than they say, could you get the, you've no idea what they're talking about, but they go and get the correct thing. And they say, did you? Yeah, I called him earlier. They've completed all those missing parts of the sentence. And I became fascinated by that with music, with language, with words. So people talking, and I'd see how much I could take away. And then you would have to kind of project into the story in a way. And I did it with music, instead of having a series of notes, I take some away. So I'm a great reductionist. So when I do production, when I did a production on these two young women, I did this piece in the last month, they gave me something like 38 stems and I got down to 8. That's all I needed. That's all it needed to tell the story. I'm a great person in believing that there's a line they always say that if you can play any song on an acoustic guitar or a piano, it's a great song. Well, it doesn't necessarily work with electronic music, but if you can strip all the extraneous material away and it still stands up strong, that song, that piece, whatever it may be, then it's a strong piece,